In this video, we're going to go through another example of conditional statements, and we're going to use 3 push buttons here for each one of the different legs of the RGB LED. But I don't want it to just turn on when I press it. I want this to have toggling functionality. So if I press it once, it turns on the red LED. If I press it off, it turns off the red LED. And so on for each of these different ones corresponding to their color. So let's start by wiring up the hardware. So I'm going to add these 3 push buttons up top here. I should have left myself a little bit more room earlier, but here we are. Alright, so put those there and put those there. And remember, we're going to want to wire these up the same way that we wired up the other ones. We're going to need to wire one end up to ground and the other one up to a digital input, but then enable the push button, the input pull up here. So let's wire this all up the correct way. So what I'll do is, looks like we have our ground going here, so I'm just going to connect each one of the bottom parts of the push buttons here to ground. And these wires are too large for this, but I don't have my smaller ones out. And then like this. So what this is doing is all of the bottom sets of pins on these push buttons, like this row, and this row down here, are all connected to ground. And what we'll do is we'll connect the top rows here to a input, and we will, once it's pressed, it will connect the digital input pin to ground. So it will read as low. So I'm going to try and color coordinate this. So the top one will correspond to the red. This one here will correspond to the green. And this one here will correspond to the blue. Alright, so now that all looks right, my digital outputs are going to be 2, 3, and 4 for my red, green, and blue, and my digital inputs are going to be 5, 6, and 7. Alright, so let's pull up a new sketch here and jump in. So, I guess I cleared out everything. So let's start with the LED. So I'll say LED R is 2, LED green is 3, LED, oh my gosh, LED blue is 4. And then I'm going to do each one of my buttons, and I'll just abbreviate this as SW for switch, and then the color. So switch R, switch green, and switch blue. Oh, switch blue. There we go. So now I need to go through and define all of these pins. And you know, sometimes it's always helpful to just have this here, the serial port, in case we need to print something for troubleshooting purposes. So I will just set that up, and then I'm going to do each one of my pin modes here. So LED R is going to be an output. Then I'll copy and paste that twice, and then change this to green and change that to blue. And then I'm going to set up my switches here. So that's going to be switch R, and it would be input underscore pull up to enable that pull up resistor in there to prevent it from shorting out our pin. And then this would be green, and this would be blue. So yeah, as you can see, you know, we're starting to get a lot of pins up in here. So that's why creating these aliases with these macros is going to be really helpful, so we don't have to remember what's connected to what. We can just refer to its name. So let's just do the red one for right now. So if I wanted the red one to operate when it was pressed, it would look like this, right? We would do a digital read on the switch red, and if that's equal to low, that would mean that it's pressed, and then I would turn on the red light. And so that would be R and high, right? And then I could put an else statement here to say if it's not, then I can turn it to low, just like that. So if I upload this, let's see what we're working with. Oh, of course. What is the issue? I just said LED, so this should be R. Now I can upload it. kind of wish this didn't pop up over my code every time, but here we are. All right, so if I press this red one, it's on while I'm pressing it, and then once I release it, it's off. So this is, back to square one, the initial example we did. This is the working principle of this. But what we want to do is say, if I press it once, turn it on. If I press it again, turn it off. So how can we approach this? It's going to involve being able to nest conditional statements. And what I mean by that is putting like an if statement inside of another if statement. So this if statement right here tells us the red switch is pressed. So inside of here is where we want something else to happen, right? We want to say something like, and what I'm doing here is I'm writing out pseudocode, which is something that kind of looks like code, and then we can fill it in. I'm just kind of writing out my thoughts. But inside of here, we're saying we want it to be, if the light is on, turn it off. And then we'll do the opposite. Like if the light is off, turn it on. That's what we want to do. So presently, if we press it, it's just turning on the light, and if we don't press it, it's turning off the light. But what we want to happen is this. So inside of here, once we've determined that the button was pressed, we have a decision to make. There's kind of two branches here. So that tells me that we want to write a conditional statement here. And we're going to get rid of this else because we don't want to turn it off in that case. We just want our stuff here. And so I'm going to get rid of this line of code as well. And now we need to think about what we're going to put here. So how can I determine whether or not the light is on? And so what the Arduino allows us to do is I'm actually digitally reading, where I connected up the buttons to, like over here, like these switch pins. But I could also digital read the pins that the light are connected to, and that'll let me know whether it's on or off, like whether the last state I set for it was high or low. And so what that would look like is I could say if digital read, and here I can put, instead of the switches, we're going to read the state of LED R. So what I'm trying to do here is say if the light is on, so that would correspond to this giving me a value of high. So if reading the digital pin where the red LED is connected to, if that gives me a value of high, what I want to do now is I want to turn it off. And so that's just saying digital write LED R and then low. And so these curly braces in the indentation is kind of like our visual cues to kind of see where the decisions are happening and what code is going to execute together. So we go inside of loop, and then here we have a condition. And if this condition is true, we're going to enter inside of this set of curly braces here. We'll start here and it ends down here. And then our next line of code happens to be another if statement, where if this condition is true, we're going to get in between there and execute the code that's inside of there. So we are nesting conditional statements. I'm putting an if statement inside of another if statement, and we could kind of draw it out, right? There's going to be a branch here that says, if this is true, go into here, but then inside of here, there's two different branches. It's if the light's on or if it's off. And so here, I could write this again as another if statement, but I'm going to write it as an else here, because that's going to help me out, right? What I can do is I can say, if it was high, turn it off. If I put another if statement here to say if it was off, turn it on, it would just always stay on, because this is saying if it's high, turn it low, and then this would immediately check if it was low, which we just set it to low. So that's why in this case, it's good to use this else statement to chain it to this to make sure that we're only doing one of these statements at a time, right? So each time I press the button, it should toggle a state. If it's on, it turns it off. If it's off, it turns it on. So let's finish out this last line of code here and check to see if we're getting the behavior that we want. So this is kind of my complete loop right here. So let's upload it. And what am I missing here? I'm missing a semicolon, of course. This is what happens when you go back and forth between languages a lot. All right, so There we go, it's done uploading, and let's take a look at our program. And so over here, I'm going to press the red, and that turned on. I pressed it again, but it stayed on. I pressed it again and it turned off. I pressed it once and it came on for a second and then it turned off. And it did the same thing just there. So we're getting like weird behavior. Like sometimes I press it and it toggles, but sometimes it doesn't toggle, and then sometimes it just doesn't even stay on. So why isn't this program working here? Because if I'm pressing the switch, it then comes in and decides based on the previous state, to change it to the other state. And so in theory, this should work. This makes sense logically. But what we need to remember is that the instructions inside of the Arduino here are running on the order of microseconds to nanosecond scale, right? So this loop, our loop here, is running really, really fast. It's running, probably a million times a second here. So it's reading my one button press as like a ton of different button presses, like just like it thinks I'm toggling it on and off, on and off, on and off so fast, because every time it comes here to read this, it sees that it's low. And if we wanted to showcase this, right, we could come here, we could say serial.println, and then we can print out the value of this here. So let's print that. And we'll see here that like those numbers just keep scrolling in super, super, super fast, right? Faster than I can press a button. So you can kind of see it shaking there as it's doing that. So no matter like how fast I press it, it's always going to print a bunch of zeros. If I scroll this up, we'll be able to see it better, right? So even though I pressed it really fast, this whole screen just filled up with zeros because it's reading it much faster than I can press it. And so that's the issue that's arising here, is it's just reading it so fast. So the best thing we can do is, if we've detected that we press the button here, what I'll do is I'll just delay it so that it doesn't check it again for like a little bit of time. Let's say like 500 milliseconds, half a second. And this will be good enough for now. There's going to be other ways of approaching this that we can talk about in the future, but this I think should work for us, because once it's detected that we pressed it, it'll change its state. If it's high, it sets it low. Else, if it's low, it sets it high. And then it waits 500 milliseconds before checking it again to see if I've pressed it. So now it's not checking it as fast, and we should see, yeah, that it works. So it's toggling. It's toggling on and off. And if we wanted to see kind of in slow motion the behavior that was happening earlier, right, where it thought I was pressing it a bunch of different times, if I hold this for longer than 500 milliseconds, we can see it toggling on and off, which is actually what was happening earlier. It was just happening so fast that we couldn't see it. But if we just assume that when the user is interacting with our little system that we set up here, our little push buttons, that they're only going to press it for less than 500 seconds, then we should be in good shape. So that kind of shows the toggling example here. You could finish out this program if you wanted to and add the additional steps of saying, okay, well, if it's green, let's do those steps. If it's blue, let's do those steps, and allow the toggling of that. But I'll let you do that on your own time. All right, so let's see if we can like quickly finish out this example here to toggle on the other green and blue ones, and I'll show you some keyboard shortcuts here. So if I copy and paste this, like Control C and then Control V, or Command if you're on a Mac, instead of reading the red switch, I'm going to read the green switch here. So this is going to be for the green switch. And then what I need to do is just change all of these here, the LED R to be LED G. So if I select this here and highlight that, if I hit Control D and then I hit Control D again, one at a time it starts to select other things that match it. So if I just press it twice, it should select the other ones. If I press it again, it would start to select these ones up here, but I just want to change these. And then I can, in one fell swoop, change all those values. So that's a really helpful thing. And again, that's Control D or Command D if you're on a Mac. And so I'll do the same process here. So this should say switch blue, and then these are going to be LED B. And then I can upload it, and hopefully we'll see that same toggling functionality all the way across the board here. All right, it's done uploading. So I'll say, let's toggle on the red, toggle it off, toggle on green, turn it off, blue, turn it off. But then I should be able to toggle on green and then toggle on red and get like yellow. Then I could toggle on blue and it gives me the white color. And then I could turn off green and I get purple, and so on, right? You can just mix all your colors.